Thank you very much. We might start, as we've got one more session to go after this. My name's Michael Dundon. I'm the CEO of Vic Super. Over the last 10 years, we, as a fund, have been seeking to implement the International Best Practice Global Reporting Initiatives, and we've been using those to shape our annual report. And last year, for the first time, we produced a integrated report, which was particularly successful in terms of our feedback from stakeholders and from our members. So we were very, very pleased to do that. It's nice to see that in your packs there is a piece of research that's been done by ACSI in relation to reporting improvements, and across the ASX 200, I think we've now seen an 87% of companies reporting on sustainability in some shape or form, and pleasingly there are another 12 companies that have stepped up in terms of the quality or the level of reporting they've done. So I think the message is slowly starting to build in the Australian community. So good to see. I have the very grand pleasure of introducing Professor Mervyn King, our speaker, so I'll just step straight into that. Mervyn is was a senior counsel of the former judge of the Supreme Court of South Africa. He is a Professor Extraordinaire of the University of South Africa on corporate citizenship, an honorary professor at the University of Pretoria, and visiting professor at Rhodes University. He has an honorary Doctor of Laws from the University of Witwatersrand and Leeds Metropolitan University. He is chairman of the King Committee on Corporate Governance in South Africa, which produced King 1, 2 and 3, and first vice president of the Institute of Directors of Southern Africa. He is chairman of the International Integrated Reporting Council in London, chairman emeritus of the Global Reporting Initiative in Amsterdam, a member of the Private Sector Advisory Group to the World Bank in Washington, and chairman of the Asian Centre for Corporate Governance in Mumbai. He chaired the United Nations Committee on Governance and Oversight, was president of the Advertising Standards Authority for 15 years, and the South African representative on the International Chamber of Commerce Court of Arbitration in Paris for 9 years. He's been a chairman, director and chief executive of several companies listed on the London, Luxembourg and Johannesburg stock exchanges. He has consulted, advised and spoken on legal, business, advertising, sustainability and corporate governance issues in 53 countries and has received many awards internationally. He's the author of 3 books on governance, sustainability and corporate reporting, and sits as an arbitrator and mediator locally and internationally. And now, feeling manifestly inadequate, I'd like to introduce Professor Mervyn King.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. I want to start not on the topic given to me and you read in your program, but I want to start where the last session ended. It was Milton Friedman in 1977 who said that the sole purpose of the corporation is to make profit without deception or fraud. Now, I might be doing that Nobel laureate deceased an injustice, but I think what he was saying tacitly is that the corporation is apart from society. With respect, nothing could be further from the truth because it's very much a part of society. And the question in regard to the last panel is, what does society expect of the directors of companies in which those members of society give their money to superannuation funds, pension funds, etc., and they are the providers of capital? And each entity seems to have its own society. If you take any company in Australia, if you take Westpac has its society, its customers, its directors, its suppliers, whatever. There is a Westpac society, this tapestry of individuals that's linked through a common purpose in the interests of Westpac. So what does society expect of its directors? Well, first of all, directors have a duty to take risk for reward. That's why ACSI members invest in the equity of companies and just do not leave the money in the money market because inflation would eventually kill you. No director is prescient. No director can tell what is going to happen in the future with certainty. No director can get his or her business judgment calls right 10 out of 10. I know. I've been there. I have made incorrect business judgment calls. If I took my jacket, my shirt off, you'll all be startled, but I'm covered in corporate scars. Because one of the privileged situations I'm in my life, I have an academic background on corporate law and governance and accounting standards. And I've also practically been the chairman of companies listed in London, Europe, South Africa. I've been a director of companies. I've been the chief executive of companies. So when I heard this discussion, it intrigued me that society does not expect its directors to get their business judgment calls right 10 out of 10. But what they do expect them is not to be risk averse. No economy can afford its directors to be risk averse because the economy will eventually start suffering. So what is the answer to some of the arguments put forward in the last panel? Well, Sections 299A of your Corporations Act, read with the ASIC regulatory requirements 247, creates the business judgment rule and then gives some guidance, etc. And you heard the discussion. You heard the suggestion of the AICD to have what I would call an elephant buckshot approach of to have the clearance for a director. If he's honest and reasonable, then he escapes all liability. Any liability which is absolute should be abolished. I agree with Professor Ramsey absolutely entirely. On the question of insolvency, the average business person knows when readily realizable assets are not sufficient to cover liabilities when they're due. The average business person knows from the cash flow point of view whether they're able to reach and pay liabilities on due date. So the insolvency argument I do not buy in order to justify this, what I call buckshot defense. But what is intriguing is that you don't have to be a lawyer to know the phrase, "He who alleges must prove." Now, what is fascinating about your safe harbor provision is that it deals with the duty of care and diligence. But it is in the duty of care where really directors are exposed because they're taking risk for reward and they're dealing with uncertain future events. What one needs is to change the onus of proof. If a third party, such as ASIC, avers that a director has failed in his duty of care under Section 299A, then the duty should be on them to prove that the board, acting as a collective, not individually, collectively was not objectively informed, and in fact its decision was irrational. If that happens, just a change of onus, then I want to make the submission that directors would have nothing to fear except fear itself. And we don't need, I think, that enormous change which was suggested by John on behalf of AICD. Well, the world is not what it used to be. It's certainly not the world of 1977 when Milton Friedman spoke about it. We are in a world with a concatenation of megatrends that Milton Friedman could never have envisaged. Population explosion, radical transparency with social media, finite assets being used faster than nature's regenerating them, financial crises, climate change crises, digital manufacturing. The very cars you drove in here today Parts have already been made by 3D printers. Digital manufacturing will result in huge amounts of unemployment. Factory workers that have jobs today in low-income countries will be without employment because of digital manufacturing. We have the millennials, the next generation, who will not take employment in companies that have not, the board has not applied their minds to the ESG factors impacting on value. It was until the 1930s there was no obligation on people to report even on the financial aspects of what was happening inside a company. After the Great Depression of the 1930s, it became mandatory to report on financial aspects. And as you all know in the room, there are two divergent standards of financial reporting: the IFRS standard, which is used here in Australia, and the FASB standards in the United States of America. But towards the end of the 20th century, an analysis of companies listed on great exchanges such as ASX, it was seen that 80% of the market cap of those companies was not represented by additives in a balance sheet according to these financial reporting standards. So the question arose quite naturally, what is it that is making up this 80%? Well, there were indicators which showed it was things such as the reputation of the company. The reputation of the company. Well, the company is this incapacitated, inanimate person created by statute that has no heart, soul, or mind of its own. It's the directors who create the company's reputation. It's the conscience of the directors that is reflected in what is the reputation of the company. So the governance of how the company, how the directors govern the company, became a critical part of that 80%. What is the long-term strategy of the business of the company? Have they embedded, the board, have they embedded into their long-term thinking the sustainability issues critical to the business of the company, so that I can make a reasonable assumption that the business of this company is going to sustain value creation long term, and that therefore I should invest in the equity of that company? All these issues arose in regard to that 80% by the end of the 20th century. And it was in 1997 in Boston, in America, that thought leaders started saying, we need to try and work out indicators to report on these issues. Because are boards really being accountable when you're only telling 20% of the story of what's actually happening inside a company? And the answer was clearly in the negative. And so started the indicators which led to the creation of the Global Reporting Initiative, which for various reasons moved to Amsterdam. And as many in the room know, I became the chairman of the Global Reporting Initiative. Then you heard from my introduction, I chaired the United Nations on Governance and Oversight. Kofi Annan, then the Secretary General, and I knew each other. The UN Community on Trade and Development and IFAC, the umbrella body of your societies of accountants, became concerned that financial reporting, although critical, was clearly not sufficient. Sustainability reporting, which was now developing, was critical, but on its own not sufficient. And companies were now reporting a financial report in a silo and a sustainability report in a silo, and neither was talking to each other. And yet, from a management point of view, how do we manage companies? Both functionally and operationally, we use what we've termed the 6 capitals in the framework of December 13 of the IRC: financial, manufactured, natural capital, social capital, including the relationships with your stakeholders, human capital, intellectual capital. The ongoing relationship with stakeholders are used on a daily basis on an interconnected and interrelated manner. Shouldn't we be reporting on a manner to show how the numerical side of the business is impacting on the sustainability side, and sustainability side issues on the numbers. And so this led to a meeting in Geneva between IFAC and the United Nations, which the IFAC leaders asked me to address on integrated thinking and integrated reporting, which we had already developed in South Africa, and it had been a listing requirement on a if not, why not basis. And according to Chatham House rules, we came out of that meeting, which included the World Bank, the chairman of the Big Four, the chairman of IOSCO, the IASB, the FASB, although they can't agree on standards for financial reporting, that the future maybe did lie in integrated thinking and integrated reporting. The question was how to get the who's who of corporate reporting in a room together to discuss these critical issues for companies. And it was at the convening power of His Royal Highness Prince Charles that the famous meeting at St. James's Palace was held, in which the who's who of corporate reporting around the world met. The chairman of the IASB, FASB, IAASB, IOSCO, the world chairman of the Big Four, the World Bank, IIA. I can go on and on, but you get the picture. The extraordinary thing was, of course, when everybody got this gold embossed invitation with the 3 gold feathers on, no one said no. They all arrived at St. James's Palace. Sir Michael Peet, who was then treasurer of the royal household of Peet Marwick fame, chaired the meeting. I addressed the meeting on integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. And we came out of that meeting agreeing this was the way forward. To change corporate behavior, to think on an integrated basis as we managed. So boards should think. Boards should be informed as to what are the reasonable and legitimate needs, interests, and expectations of the company's stakeholders. Otherwise, were boards really making an informed decision about strategy? How did they know the strategy proposed by senior management was going to meet the expectations of the company's stakeholders? Did they have an informed oversight function over the proposals of management if they're not aware of the legitimate and reasonable needs, interests, and expectations of stakeholders and the inputs into the company's business model, which includes the 6 capitals? And what were the activities, what are the activities inside the business model? Enterprise risk management, the way the company is governed, its strategy. And of course, then the company has its output, its product, but it does not stop there on an integrated basis. Because as you all know, the company's product goes out into society and impacts on society. I'm sorry David Gonski's not here from Coca-Cola. David and I have known each other about 40 years, but you all know the case of Coca-Cola, 100 years old, and the allegation that the Coke has caused the obesity of children. And 2 years ago, Coca-Cola, a whole new marketing strategy that they will not market to children under the age of 12. At all their bottling plants around the world, they will encourage exercise for children under 12, and they will make their product with the lower calorie count as possible. Hence the launch of Coca-Cola Life, which I'm sure you've all seen. So the very concept of value started changing as well. How were we taught? We were taught through the financial lens that value consisted of the present value of discounted future cash flows. Interesting. Did this company really just operate in a financial bubble? Of course it did not. It operates because business is at the junction of finance, society, and the environment. It impacts on all three, and all three important, ESG. And so value today is seen as how the company makes its money. How did this company make its money? Fascinating questions sometimes to ask at board meetings. When you would become a new non-executive director, try it out. Thank you very much for my induction. but I'd very much like to ask the Chief Executive, through you, Mr. Chairman, to please tell me, how did the company make $150 million bottom line before tax in the year under review? Because I've read the annual report, but I don't understand how the company made the money. How did it make its money? And the other questions are, what are the impacts, the positive impacts on those 6 capital aspects, particularly society and the environment? How in the year ahead is the company going to enhance those positive impacts? How in the year ahead are they going to eradicate or ameliorate the negative impacts? Then one starts getting true value creation in the company. Critical questions for ASIC members to ask directors of companies before investing in the equity of those companies. Describe your business model to me. What are the inputs in your company? Tell me your long-term strategy. What are the sustainability issues critical to your business? Are they embedded in your long-term strategy? Describe the outcomes of your product to me. And if they haven't applied these minds to these issues, then one has to be quite critical. Winston Churchill, in the last few weeks of the Second World War, wrote a 3-page letter to his wife. And in the last sentence he said, "If I'd had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter." I think you all know that. It's gone around the world, that statement. Boards have to just spend a little bit more time understanding the financial report. Research has shown that up to 20% of directors do not understand the financial report. They have to spend a little bit more time understanding the sustainability report and all the other data which is collected by a company today, all of which can be online. Then extract the material matter defined as that which impacts financially, socially, and environmentally, and explain it in clear, concise, and understandable language, so that the user can make an informed assessment that the business of this company will in all probability sustain value creation long term. That's what an integrated report is about. You heard Michael in his introduction today say ACSI has now done its integrated report, which I congratulate it absolutely, but a positive reaction from stakeholders. Why? You know why? They could actually read it and understand it, and they could make an informed assessment about what ACSI was doing. And if you look at ACSI's purpose, it's to help its members make investment decision risks involving ESG factors. So it meets that. The 3 shifts happening around the world. The one is from financial capital to inclusive capital. There was a conference held in London about a year ago. The Lord Mayor hosted it. There were speakers which included Bill Clinton, Ratan Tata of Tata Manufacturing in India, and fascinating. All said the future, we've got to look at capitalism as inclusive capitalism. We can no longer follow and carry on with the plague of short-term capitalism. So the second shift is from short-term capitalism to sustainable capitalism. Sustainable capitalism defined as being able to say, what are the positive impacts and how you're going to enhance those positive impacts on financially, socially, and environmentally. And then the third shift is from silo reporting to integrated reporting. And you put those in circles and you put them and they overlap. And they do overlap. And in the middle, and I've said this publicly before, is the accountancy profession. Extraordinary that even 10 years ago, the accountants in the room will know, and I know there are some, and some from the Big Four sitting here, that their audit fees are bigger than their advisory fees. The business person turns first to his or her accountant for advice. The accountancy profession, one of the things in the very DNA of the profession, in the very fabric of the profession, is public interest. Google the ethical standards of IFAC. You will see public interest critical. And is it not in the public interest to know what is happening inside this artificial person, the company, in which your money is invested in the equity of that company providing the capital? The answer is absolutely yes. And the accountants today are helping to advise companies on integrated thinking, embedding sustainability issues into strategy so that corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment is becoming yesterday's thinking, because these factors are now built into the business strategy of the company. And what is driving this? Several factors. One of the most important is responsible investment. You're all aware of the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment, and there are responsible investment codes around the world. Your stewardship code, I understand, is about to be launched. But critical to these codes is that before investing your ultimate beneficiary's money in the equity of a company, you should take into account in your investment analysis how has the company dealt with the ESG factors, and you should ask inter alia the following questions. Has the company done an integrated report? If not, why not? Has the company done a sustainability report? If not, why not? Has the company got a supply chain code of conduct? If not, why not? Because how often have we learned that something happens in the supply chain which impacts adversely on the value of the equity in which we invest? And what's been monitored in that supply chain? Are you using child labor in the supply chain, which you know could impact adversely on the value in the equity of the company you invest as the consumer? So, integrated reporting, integrated thinking informs people about ESG risks. We are actually at the tipping point on planet Earth in regard to various matters, and I'm not going to bore you with those. I'm just going to make the statement, and you're fully aware of it. We have been steering, because director comes from the Latin to steer. We have been steering companies down a street of last opportunity. We actually now do have a last opportunity at this time to actually think on an integrated basis, incorporate all these ESG factors into strategy, and to build companies that sustain value creation. We dare not be seated towards the end of the century at a banquet of adverse consequences, because that's what will happen if we did not change our corporate behavior. Do you have to grope in the dark in this regard? No. You have the light before you in regard to integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. So we've got a few minutes for questions, but perhaps I can kick off. Given your global role, I'm just curious as to which regions you think are particularly strong in terms of picking up integrated reporting and implementing it, and what some of the benefits they might have seen.
Okay, so the first region to do that, of course, was South Africa, because of the recommendation in 2009 to do integrated thinking and integrated reporting, and it was adopted by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as a listing requirement on an if not, why not basis. So that's some 450 companies doing integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. So it's not my say-so. What we did at the IRC, we appointed Black Sun as an independent research house, And I invite you all to Google the irc.org. And on the website you will find the Black Sun survey, where they interrogated 105 of the world's iconic companies that joined our pilot program in 2010 and started doing integrated thinking and doing integrated reports. And in those surveys, companies like HSBC, Microsoft, SAP, Coca-Cola, have given the benefits which they have found from adopting integrated thinking and doing an integrated report. One of the best known ones is Unilever, and I think you all know what's happened with that company. So the benefits have been enormous, according to the reports. They find that there is a better understanding from the top to the bottom about the strategy of the company. And from my personal experience, I just know over the years that when you get buy-in to strategy, you can get ordinary people to achieve the most extraordinary things. And if you don't get that buy-in, you can have PhDs from the top down to the tea lady, and you won't even achieve ordinary things. So there is an analysis from an independent research house that, in fact, it's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, terrific. Questions from the floor? Julie, we've got a mic somewhere down here. It's coming.
Thank you. Julie Lander from Care Super. I'm just wondering whether there is any pushback from companies who feel that they're giving away their strategy to their competitors with integrated reporting, and how do you balance the needs of shareholders?
One needs to be transparent. By that we don't mean nakedness. We mean balanced reporting, the positives with the negatives, because otherwise if you select, open this door and close that door, you get selected information. Selected information equals misinformation. At the same time, we have one of the megatrends in the world is radical transparency. As you all know, many stock exchanges, including the ASX, is concerned that you can have someone tweeting something which is incorrect about the corporation, yet you and I are trading in the equities of the company on the exchange. So the question is, should a company remain listed only if it has management which can deal immediately with something that happens on social media? So the days when you could hide something in a corporate closet has come to an end. You just have to accept it. In any event, to attract new capital by way of a rights issue, assuming that you are a listed entity, those following the principles of responsible investment will be asking about your long-term strategy to see. And they'll be asking you questions like, have you done an integrated report, or why not? If not, and your supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So in order to raise capital, all these questions are being asked now by the great asset owners of the world. And I think ASIC members have about $2 trillion. So huge influence you have on companies in regard to disclosure on strategy, etc. So the quick answer to your question, through radical transparency today, there's very little that is corporate secrets.
Another question here. Thank you.
Amanda Keogh, Global Reporting Initiative. Thank you for your remarks, Mervyn. And I'm sure that you and David Gonski have much more in common than just South Africa. In fact, I think you have a shared interest in how boards can behave in more long-term interest of their stakeholders and shareholders. So I'd be interested in your views as to how we can foster that type of long-term thinking on behalf of boards going forward.
Okay, the interesting thing is that a board acts as a collective. When something goes wrong, which was discussed at the previous panel, the law starts looking at the directors individually to see what he or she did. I think a lot about boards looking long-term is if a board accepts that they just cannot carry on business as usual. Let's just examine a couple of the mega trends. You have 7.5 billion people at the moment on planet Earth. If you've read my book, Transient Caretakers, I describe the Earth as an hotel. I call it Planet Inn. I'm the innkeeper, and I say I'm fully justified to put up a sign, no vacancies, because 1/8 of the people last night went to bed hungry. 1/8 had no access to potable water, and yet in 30 to 40 years' time, we're going to have another 2 billion people on the planet. Where are they going to board and lodge? We already have food insecurity. We have a lack of potable water. So when you realize that you're dealing with finite assets which are being used faster than nature's regenerating them, if you think you can carry on business as usual, welcome to the age of stupidity. Think about it. You certainly would be lacking in your duty of care. And no matter whether you changed the onus of proof or you had the elephant gun approach of the AICD, I'm afraid you would be liable to the company. So that is why the world's great multinational enterprises, to quote Paul Pullman of Unilever, we have to carry on business as unusual. We can't carry on as usual. And they've changed their strategy. And as you know, Paul Pullman went public with his strategy. That's a good example. In 2009, in the Guardian newspaper, he went public that I have to change because all our factories are on the main grid. And the cost of power from main grid is just going to go up and up. We have to try and get renewable energy sources to drive our factories. Plant is all diesel. And we've reached peak oil. And in the end, the cost of diesel is going to keep climbing. I'm not sure about that anymore. But that's what he said in 2009. And in fact, my plant and machinery will, in the next 5 to 7 years, become stranded assets. How many people in the room have looked at their balance sheets and thought about the megatrends, some of which I've outlined to you, that in fact assets on your balance sheet are going to become stranded assets in the next 5 to 7 years? So when a board appreciates all these things and one applies one's mind to the question of the inputs that you're actually dealing with these resources, that you learn of the needs, interests and expectations of your stakeholders, then you start realizing you have to think long-term. You have to plan long-term. Otherwise, you're in fact failing in your duty of care.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Yes, over here on the right.
Thank you. It's Nick Ridehouse, KPMG. Mervyn, one of the things you haven't talked about, which you have talked about in other sessions, is around the importance of someone advising the board or supporting the board around what the stakeholders actually want. So my two-part question is, what do you see as that chief stakeholder officer's role in the future corporate structure? And secondly, you've got the ACSI members here. One of the questions we also hear from boards is we never could actually ask the questions about those other 4 capitals at our AGM or at our investor briefing sessions. So what can the ACSI members, what are the key questions they should be asking around those 80% matters? You mentioned some in your speech.
What Nick is referring to is that many multinational enterprises have appointed a whole new corporate animal called the Corporate Stakeholder Relationship Officer. This is a senior corporate appointment. You will appreciate that in trying to find out what are the legitimate and reasonable needs, interests and expectations of the company stakeholders are, management has to do it. So management time is being spent now on this ongoing communication with the various stakeholder groupings instead of implementing the decisions of the board. So many companies, true larger companies, have appointed corporate stakeholder relationship officers who, by profile, have usually been chief executives of a company, have a great understanding how business operates, are good communicators. They talk to stakeholders on an ongoing basis, learn about the needs, interests and expectations of stakeholders, inform management. Management on a more informed basis develop strategy. The board, at every board meeting, should have an agenda item, stakeholder relationships, so that the board at each board meeting, 4 board meetings a year, let's say, gets informed of what are the needs, interests and expectations of stakeholders, you will appreciate that the board then has a more informed oversight over the proposals of senior management in regard to strategy. So that's the first part of the question that Nick asked. The second part is that the questions that should be asked are, what do you regard are the critical inputs into your business? Please describe your business model to me. Now, this embraces a lot of things. What is your enterprise risk management? Have you, your risk matrix and your heat pad, is there anything that you have thought of, anything you can think of which is an unanticipated risk for this business? The questions of unanticipated risk has become a critical issue in boards around the world. And I'll just give you one example. That's the Nestle example. I don't know how many of you know the Nestle example. Some 4 or 5 years ago, Nestle, the biggest food producer in the world, its main source of supply of palm oil came from Malaysia. Those of you who've been to Kuala Lumpur know from the airport right into Kuala Lumpur, you just see palm oil trees. They've cut the wetland forest down. Greenpeace. When I say Greenpeace, you think of trying to stop catching whales. But Greenpeace is a civil society movement, and Greenpeace said to Nestle, if you just stop your source of supply from and get them to cut down some of these palm oil trees and regrow some of the wetland forests, first of all, it will be better for Kuala Lumpur, which is choking. But very important, that's the original habitat of the orangutan. And we want to reintroduce the orangutan into there because it's becoming an endangered species. And scientists are telling us this is one of the closest animals to Homo sapiens. Yes. Well, they did it. So what did Greenpeace do? They created a YouTube of a video which went on YouTube of a lady going into a supermarket in Zurich, the head office is in Geneva, and she buys a Kit Kat. She peels open the Kit Kat, out comes the cut-off bleeding finger of an orangutan. Well, it took 7 days for Nestle to get an injunction, an interdict to stop the YouTube, but by that time there'd been 400 million tweets, 250 million emails. The cat was out of the bag. Nestle started changing its source of supply, and if you go to drive into Kuala Lumpur now, you'll see them cutting down some of the palm oil trees to recreate part of that wetland so that Greenpeace can reintroduce the orangutan into the wetland forests around Kuala Lumpur. A complete unanticipated risk. But look at the greater expectation from stakeholders today than ever before. Energized activism, which boards have to look at as unanticipated risks.
Okay, unfortunately, I think time is against us. So thank you very much, Mervyn. Very, very interesting presentation. Please join me in thanking Professor Mervyn King.